The courtroom fell silent as Officer Miller's hand struck Jamal's face, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Then the doors swung open. Marcus Williams stood there, FBI badge gleaming. "That's my son you just assaulted," he announced. "And this case just became federal." Before I continue this shocking story of justice and corruption, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. What would you do if someone in authority abused their power against your family? Let's find out what happens next in this incredible true story of justice served. Jamal Williams was just 16 years old when his life changed forever. A tall, lanky basketball player with dreams of college scholarships. He was walking home from practice one autumn evening through the affluent Oak Ridge neighborhood. The sunset painted the sky orange and purple as Jamal cut through the neighborhood, a shortcut he'd taken dozens of times before when staying late at school for extra practice. He was focused on the new plays Coach Johnson had introduced, mentally rehearsing his footwork when the first call came in to the police station. "There's a suspicious person in the neighborhood," reported Mrs. Harriet Blackwell, peering through her living room curtains at the black teenager in a hoodie and basketball shorts. Within minutes, 2 more calls followed with similar reports. Officer Richard Miller was 38, with 14 years on the force and a reputation among his colleagues for keeping certain elements in their place. He responded to the call with immediate intensity, speeding into Oak Ridge with sirens blaring. When Miller spotted Jamal walking along Maple Avenue, he screeched to a halt, threw open his door, and immediately drew his weapon. "Freeze! Hands where I can see them," he shouted, despite Jamal showing no threatening behavior whatsoever. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest as he carefully raised his hands, his basketball falling to the pavement. "Officer, what's going on?" Jamal asked, his voice steady despite his fear. He'd been taught by his parents how to interact with police: be respectful, comply with instructions, but know your rights. Miller approached aggressively, gun still pointed at Jamal's chest. "Shut your mouth. Turn around, hands against the wall." Jamal complied, asking again, "Sir, may I ask why I'm being detained?" This simple, constitutional question seemed to enrage Miller. "You questioning my authority, boy," he growled, roughly pushing Jamal against the brick wall of the nearest building. Miller began searching Jamal's backpack with unnecessary force, dumping his schoolbooks and basketball gear onto the sidewalk. What Jamal couldn't see was Miller slipping a small bag of marijuana from his own pocket into the front compartment of the backpack. By now, several residents had emerged from their homes, smartphones recording the interaction. "I found drugs in his possession," Miller announced loudly for the benefit of the onlookers, holding up the small bag he had just planted. "You're under arrest." Jamal's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's not mine. I've never seen that before." His protests were cut short as Miller violently twisted his arms behind his back, applying the handcuffs so tightly they cut into Jamal's wrists. Despite offering no resistance, Jamal was thrown roughly to the ground, Miller's knee pressing into his back with unnecessary force. "Please," Jamal gasped, "I didn't do anything wrong. That's not my stuff." His pleas were ignored as Miller yanked him to his feet and shoved him into the back of the patrol car. At the police station, confusion reigned as Jamal repeatedly tried to explain his innocence. The booking officer seemed disinterested in his claims of evidence planting. "Sure, kid. Never heard that one before," the officer said with a smirk. Hours passed, and despite Jamal's repeated requests, no one contacted his family. "My mom must be worried sick," Jamal told the desk sergeant. "Can I please call her?" The sergeant barely looked up from his computer. "You'll get your phone call when we're good and ready." What Jamal didn't know was that his father, Marcus, was away on what the family believed was a business trip. In reality, Marcus Williams was an undercover FBI agent working on a major case. Sarah Chin, an overworked public defender of 31, was finally assigned to Jamal's case nearly 8 hours after his arrest. Flipping through the hastily assembled file, she immediately noticed inconsistencies in the police report. "This doesn't add up," she muttered to herself, noting the discrepancies between the reported time of arrest and the booking time. The next morning, Jamal appeared before Judge Harrison Wells, a stern 62-year-old with close ties to the police department. Despite Jamal's clean record and strong community ties, Judge Wells set bail at an astronomical $25,000. "But Your Honor," Sarah Chin protested, "my client has no prior record, is a minor, and the amount of marijuana allegedly found wouldn't warrant this bail amount even for an adult offender." Judge Wells peered over his glasses. "The court is concerned about the defendant's presence in a neighborhood where he doesn't belong. Bail is set at $25,000. As Jamal was led away, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He was caught in a system that didn't see him as a 16-year-old kid with a bright future, but as something to be feared and controlled. News of Jamal's arrest spread like wildfire through the predominantly black neighborhood of Westwood. Diana Williams, Jamal's mother, a dedicated elementary school teacher of 43 years, received the call about her son's arrest while grading papers late into the night. "Arrested? My Jamal?" she had repeated in disbelief, her hands shaking as she clutched the phone. There must be some mistake. Diana immediately tried calling her husband Marcus, but his phone went straight to voicemail. What she didn't know was that Marcus was deep undercover, his communications limited to protect his identity while investigating a major corruption case. After a sleepless night, Diana sprang into action, calling everyone she knew. Her first call was to Pastor Michael Thompson of First Baptist Church, who had known Jamal since he was a baby. "They're saying he had drugs." "Pastor Thompson," Diana explained, her voice cracking. "You know my boy. He wouldn't touch that stuff. He's too focused on his future." Pastor Thompson, a respected 52-year-old community leader with a powerful voice and an even more powerful presence, immediately assured her, "Don't you worry, Sister Williams. We'll get to the bottom of this." By morning, Diana had contacted the local NAACP chapter, and Vernon Jackson, the chapter president, was already making calls to his contacts in the legal community. Meanwhile, Jamal's high school friends weren't sitting idle. Led by his best friend Andre Patterson, they organized a social media campaign with the hashtag Justice for Jamal. "They picked the wrong kid to mess with," Andre told the growing group of teenagers gathering in his family's living room. "Jamal's the straightest arrow I know. We're not letting this stand." The teenagers worked tirelessly, sharing posts, creating videos, and reaching out to local influencers. By noon, the video footage of Jamal's arrest, captured by neighborhood residents, had gone viral. The footage clearly showed Officer Miller's misconduct, from the unnecessary aggression to the moment when, if viewed carefully, he could be seen reaching into his own pocket before discovering the marijuana in Jamal's backpack. Taylor Reed, a 29-year-old journalist for the local independent newspaper, saw the video and recognized Officer Miller. "I've reported on this cop before," she told her editor. "There's a pattern here." Taylor began digging through archives and public records, uncovering a disturbing history of complaints against Miller, almost exclusively from black citizens. Despite the mounting evidence of misconduct, Police Chief Gregory Parker held a press conference defending Miller. Standing before a forest of microphones, the 59-year-old chief's face remained impassive as he stated, "Officer Miller is an exemplary member of our force with an unblemished record. The department stands behind him 100%. The statement caused outrage in the Westwood community, where residents knew better. Meanwhile, Diana faced the daunting task of raising $25,000 for bail. With trembling hands, she signed the papers to mortgage the family home, the modest 3-bedroom house she and Marcus had saved for years to purchase. "We'll figure it out," Pastor Thompson assured her as they left the bank. "The community's behind you." True to his word, by evening, church members, neighbors, and even strangers touched by Jamal's story had contributed to a fund to help the Williams family. With the community's help, Diana managed to post bail, and Jamal was finally released, nearly 48 hours after his arrest. The reunion between mother and son in the stark corridor of the detention center was tearful. "Mom, I swear I didn't do anything wrong," Jamal said, his voice breaking as Diana held him tight. "I know, baby. I know," she whispered, noticing how her tall, confident son seemed somehow smaller, his shoulders hunched, eyes darting nervously. The psychological impact of his ordeal was already evident. That evening, Pastor Thompson organized a community meeting at First Baptist Church. The historic building, a cornerstone of the Black community since Reconstruction, was packed to capacity. "We are gathered here tonight," Pastor Thompson's voice resonated through the sanctuary, "because one of our children has been wronged. But we know that Jamal's case is not unique. This is happening to our sons and daughters every day." As community members shared similar experiences, a sense of collective determination filled the room. But not everyone supported their cause. The next morning, Diana found an anonymous note pushed under their front door: "Keep your boy in your own neighborhood or next time he won't come home." Similar threats were taped to the church doors. Despite Diana's repeated attempts to reach Marcus, his undercover status meant he remained unaware of the crisis unfolding at home. Jamal's 12-year-old sister Zoe was not spared either. A bright, perceptive girl who idolized her big brother, she returned from school with reddened eyes. "Some kids said Jamal's a criminal," she told her mother. "They said he's going to prison?" Diana held her daughter close. "That's not true, sweetheart. Your brother did nothing wrong, and we're going to prove it." The community organized a peaceful protest outside the police station, with hundreds marching with signs reading, "Justice for Jamal," and "End police brutality." The department responded by positioning officers in riot gear at the entrance, their presence an implicit threat that did nothing to deter the determined protesters. As darkness fell, Diana stood at her kitchen window, watching the street outside, wondering where her husband was and how she would navigate the challenges ahead without him. What she couldn't know was that Marcus was closer to coming home than anyone realized, and his return would change everything. The morning of the preliminary hearing dawned with a sky heavy with rain clouds, matching the mood of the Williams family as they approached the imposing courthouse. Diana and Jamal walked hand in hand, surrounded by a protective circle of community members, facing a gauntlet of reporters shoving microphones in their faces and shouting questions. "Mrs. Williams, does your family have a history of drug use? Jamal, did you think you could sell drugs in Oak Ridge without consequences?" The questions were accusatory, framed to suggest guilt before any evidence had been presented. Diana squeezed her son's hand tighter. "Keep your head up," she whispered. "Remember what your father always says. The truth doesn't fear examination." Inside the courthouse, the circus continued. A media area had been set up, unusual for a minor drug possession case involving a juvenile. Even more unusual was the presence of District Attorney William Bennett himself, a sharp-featured man of 55 who typically only handled high-profile violent crimes. His personal involvement in a small marijuana case raised immediate red flags for Sarah Chin, Jamal's public defender. "Something's not right," she murmured to Diana as they waited outside the courtroom. "Bennett doesn't get out of bed for less than armed robbery, let alone juvenile possession." The courtroom doors opened, and the Williams family entered to find the gallery already crowded. On one side sat supporters from Westwood, on the other, a row of uniformed police officers, there to show solidarity with Officer Miller. Miller himself sat at the prosecution table, looking confident and composed in his dress uniform, a stark contrast to the frightened teenager he had arrested. As Judge Wells entered and the proceedings began, Sarah Chin immediately moved to dismiss the case based on the inconsistencies she had discovered. "Your Honor, the evidence handling in this case shows serious irregularities. The chain of custody documentation for the alleged marijuana is incomplete, and the timestamps on Officer Miller's body camera footage don't match the reported time of arrest. Bennett rose smoothly to counter. Your Honor, the defense is attempting to distract from the simple facts. Officer Miller caught this young man with illegal substances in a neighborhood where he had no legitimate business being. Judge Wells nodded, his expression making his leaning clear before he even spoke. Motion to dismiss denied. Let's proceed with the evidence. What happened next stunned everyone in the courtroom. Bennett produced a large screen and announced the prosecution would like to present Officer Miller's body camera footage. The video began playing, but Sarah Chin immediately jumped to her feet. Objection. This footage has been edited. I reviewed the original video this morning, and there are significant sections missing. The video showed Jamal being confrontational from the start, but anyone who had seen the viral civilian footage knew this was a fabrication. Sections where Miller had been aggressive had been neatly excised, creating a false narrative of a belligerent teenager and a patient officer. Judge Wells overruled Chen's objection. The court accepts the prosecution's evidence as presented. Sarah tried again. Your Honor, I have civilian footage that contradicts this version of events. Inadmissible. Wells declared without hesitation. Unverified sources. The pattern continued as Bennett presented his case. Each time Chen objected, Wells overruled. Each time she presented countering evidence, it was deemed inadmissible on technicalities. Then came Bennett's most shocking move. The prosecution would like to introduce evidence of the defendant's prior behavioral issues, he announced, producing a file. Jamal Williams has a history of confrontations at his school. Diana gasped. The confrontations Bennett referred to were two incidents where Jamal had stood up to bullies who were harassing younger students. In one case, he had physically intervened when a freshman was being beaten by 3 seniors. His actions had been praised by the school principal. But Bennett was spinning these events as evidence of violent tendencies. Throughout the proceedings, Diana kept checking her phone, hoping for a response from Marcus. In desperation, she had sent messages to his emergency contact, a number Marcus had given her to use only in dire circumstances. What she didn't know was that FBI Special Agent Terrence Washington, Marcus's handler, was already in the courtroom, observing from the back row. Washington, a distinguished 45-year-old veteran agent, had received Diana's messages and immediately recognized the significance of the situation. As Bennett continued his character assassination of Jamal, Chen fought back with every legal tool at her disposal, but Judge Wells seemed determined to let the prosecution run roughshod over proper procedure. The system is rigged against us from the start, whispered an elderly woman sitting behind Diana. They decided that boy was guilty the moment they saw his skin. Outside the courtroom, the crowd of supporters had grown, their chants occasionally audible through the thick doors. Justice for Jamal! Justice for Jamal! Inside, Jamal sat straight-backed but increasingly dejected as the proceedings continued to mount against him. At the conclusion of the preliminary hearing, Judge Wells's ruling was no surprise. The court finds sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. The defendant will remain free on bail, but is restricted from entering the Oak Ridge neighborhood and must observe a strict 8 p.m. curfew. As the courtroom began to clear, Chen approached Diana and Jamal. This isn't over, she assured them. They're breaking rules left and right. We can use that on appeal if necessary. Diana nodded, but her eyes were drawn to a man she didn't recognize, who had been watching the proceedings intently from the back row. There was something in his focused attention that gave her hope that perhaps not everyone in the system was corrupt. Do you think the justice system treats everyone equally regardless of race? Comment number 1 if you believe systematic racism exists in our courts, or number 2 if you think everyone gets a fair shake. Hit that like button if you're outraged by what's happening to Jamal. And subscribe to see what happens next in this shocking true story. How would you feel walking into a courtroom knowing the judge, the prosecutor, and the police were all working together against you? Let's continue this incredible story and see how the Williams family fights back against a corrupt system. The formal hearing arrived with unsettling speed. This case is being fast-tracked like nothing I've ever seen, Sarah Chin told Diana and Jamal as they huddled in a consultation room before the proceedings. Typically, a case like this would take months to get to this stage. Someone wants this wrapped up quickly. Jamal adjusted his tie nervously, the formal attire feeling strange after years of t-shirts and basketball jerseys. Do I have to look at him? At Officer Miller? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chin placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Focus on me when you're testifying. Just tell the truth exactly as it happened. The courtroom was even more crowded than during the preliminary hearing. News of the case had spread beyond the local community, attracting civil rights activists and legal observers concerned about the handling of the case. Officer Miller sat at the prosecution table in full dress uniform, brass buttons gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His expression was one of professional detachment, but his eyes followed Jamal with barely concealed contempt. Judge Wells called the court to order, and District Attorney Bennett wasted no time calling Miller to the stand. Miller's testimony was polished to perfection, clearly rehearsed. He described patrolling the high-end residential neighborhood when he spotted a suspicious individual who appeared out of place. According to Miller, Jamal had immediately shown signs of nervousness and aggression when approached. Based on my 14 years of experience, his behavior indicated he was hiding contraband, Miller testified, his voice steady and authoritative. When I conducted a legal search based on reasonable suspicion, I discovered a bag of marijuana in his backpack's front pocket. Bennett nodded approvingly throughout the testimony, occasionally glancing at the jury to ensure they were absorbing the narrative. And did the defendant cooperate with your lawful commands? Officer Miller? He asked. Miller shook his head solemnly. No, sir. He was belligerent from the start, questioning my authority to even speak to him. When Sarah Chin rose for cross-examination, her approach was methodical. Officer Miller, you testified that you spotted Jamal Williams and immediately considered him suspicious. What specific behaviors indicated criminal activity? Miller shifted slightly. As I said, he appeared out of place in that neighborhood. Chin pressed harder. Being out of place is subjective, officer. What observable behaviors suggested criminal intent? Miller's confident facade began to crack. His manner of dress, his posture, the way he was looking around, Chin interrupted. So, a black teenager in a hoodie automatically looks suspicious to you? Objection! Bennett shouted. Counsel is badgering the witness and implying racial bias without foundation. Judge Wells sustained the objection, but the damage was done. The jurors had seen Miller's momentary discomfort. Chin continued her cross-examination, highlighting contradictions between Miller's testimony and the written police report. You stated in your report that you observed the suspect for 3 minutes before engaging. But today you testified it was immediately upon seeing him. Which is accurate? Miller's jaw tightened. I may have misspoken. The report is correct. Chen nodded, moving to a large displayed board. Let's discuss the route you claim Jamal took through Oak Ridge. She pointed to a map. You testified he was moving in a pattern consistent with casing houses. But the route you've described would require him to double back several times and ignore direct paths. Does that make sense to you? Miller's irritation became increasingly visible as Chen systematically dismantled his testimony. Judge Wells repeatedly sustained Bennett's objections. But each time Chen simply reformulated her questions, gradually exposing the inconsistencies in Miller's account. When Jamal took the stand, the contrast was striking. Where Miller had been rehearsed and professional, Jamal was earnest and straightforward. He described his routine of cutting through Oak Ridge after late basketball practice, his confusion at being stopped, and his shock when drugs he'd never seen before were supposedly found in his backpack. I don't do drugs, Jamal stated firmly. Coach Johnson drug tests the entire team regularly. Basketball is my ticket to college. I'd never risk that. Bennett's cross-examination was aggressive, designed to provoke an emotional response. He paced before Jamal, firing questions without waiting for complete answers, repeatedly cutting the teenager off mid-sentence. So you expect this court to believe that an officer with an exemplary record would risk his career to frame a random teenager? Bennett demanded, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Throughout the hostile questioning, Jamal maintained his composure, responding respectfully but firmly to each accusation. His dignified behavior clearly resonated with several jurors, who nodded slightly as he spoke. The most dramatic moment came when Sarah Chin called a surprise witness, Mrs. Eleanor Chambers, a 72-year-old white resident of Oak Ridge. The elderly woman walked slowly to the stand, her back straight despite her years. Mrs. Chambers, where were you on the evening of October 12th? Chin asked after the witness was sworn in. I was watering my roses in my front garden, as I do every evening, Mrs. Chambers replied, her voice surprisingly strong. My home is at the corner of Maple and Elm, directly across from where this young man was arrested. And did you witness the interaction between Officer Miller and Jamal Williams? Mrs. Chambers nodded firmly. Every moment of it. My eyesight may not be what it once was, but I was less than 30 feet away. What Mrs. Chambers described next contradicted Miller's testimony on nearly every point. The officer approached with his weapon drawn immediately. The boy was polite and cooperative. And I saw very clearly when the officer took something from his own pocket before claiming to find it in the backpack. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Bennett leapt to his feet. Objection. This witness was not on the prosecution's list. Nor was she on the defense's original list, Chin countered. Mrs. Chambers came forward this morning after seeing news coverage of the case. Judge Wells had no choice but to allow the testimony, though his displeasure was evident. As Mrs. Chambers continued her account, Officer Miller's face flushed with anger. He leaned over to whisper urgently to Bennett, who attempted to discredit Mrs. Chambers during cross-examination by suggesting her age affected her perception. I may be old, young man, Mrs. Chambers responded with steel in her voice, but I know what I saw. That officer planted evidence on that boy, and I will say so under oath as many times as necessary. The tension in the courtroom was palpable when Judge Wells called for a 15-minute recess. During the break, Miller confronted Jamal in the hallway outside the courtroom, cornering him near the water fountain. You think you're winning? Miller hissed, standing uncomfortably close. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. People like you don't win against people like me. Before Jamal could respond, Sarah Chin appeared, inserting herself between them. Step back, Officer Miller. Any communication with my client should go through me. Miller sneered but retreated, his eyes promising this wasn't the end. When court reconvened after the recess, the atmosphere was charged with tension. District Attorney Bennett immediately launched into damage control, calling a police evidence technician to testify about the chain of custody for the marijuana found in Jamal's possession. The evidence bag was properly sealed and logged according to department protocols, the technician stated, though under Chen's cross-examination, he admitted he hadn't been present during the actual arrest. Bennett then attempted to discredit Mrs. Chambers' testimony by suggesting her position in her garden wouldn't have given her a clear view of the interaction. The defense would like to clarify this point, Chen announced. Your Honor, I request permission for my client to stand and help demonstrate the exact location of his arrest in relation to Mrs. Chambers' property. Judge Wells reluctantly agreed, and Jamal rose from his seat. Chen asked him to describe the precise location where Officer Miller had stopped him. As Jamal stood before the court, pointing to locations on a projected map of the neighborhood, Officer Miller suddenly stood as well, moving to stand beside the exhibit. The defendant is mistaken, Miller interrupted. The stop occurred here, not there. He pointed to a location that would have been partially obscured from Mrs. Chambers' view. Chen objected to Miller's unsolicited intervention. But Judge Wells overruled her. Officer Miller may assist in clarifying the facts, he stated. Miller positioned himself unnecessarily close to Jamal, their shoulders nearly touching. The officer towered over the teenager, using his physical presence as intimidation. Jamal, however, stood his ground. Sir, with respect. You stopped me directly under the streetlight at the corner of Maple and Elm. Mrs. Chambers' roses are on the corner property. She had a clear view of everything. Miller's face tightened. Are you calling me a liar, boy? The word boy hung in the air, its racial connotation unmistakable. Jamal remained composed. I'm simply stating where the arrest happened, sir. For a brief moment, the courtroom was still, the tension building like a thunderstorm. Then, with shocking suddenness, Miller's control snapped. His hand flew out, striking Jamal across the face with such force that the teenager staggered backward. The sound of the slap echoed through the stunned courtroom. Gasps and cries of outrage erupted from the gallery. Order! Order in the court! Judge Wells shouted, banging his gavel repeatedly as bailiffs moved to separate Miller from Jamal. Diana half rose from her seat, restrained only by Pastor Thompson's gentle hand on her arm. Instead of immediately removing Miller or holding him in contempt, Judge Wells merely admonished him. Officer Miller, control yourself. This court will not tolerate such displays. The mild reprimand for such a serious breach was telling. Sarah Chen was on her feet instantly. Your Honor, I move for an immediate mistrial. Officer Miller has just physically assaulted my client in full view of this court. Judge Wells frowned. The court recognizes that emotions are running high. Officer Miller's action, while inappropriate, does not necessarily warrant a mistrial. The jury will disregard the incident. The blatant double standard left the courtroom in shock. Jamal stood tall despite the red mark blooming on his cheek, his dignity in stark contrast to Miller's loss of control. A terrible silence fell over the courtroom, heavy with the weight of injustice laid bare. It was in this moment of stillness that the main doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Every head turned. A tall, powerfully built black man in his late 40s stood in the doorway, his presence commanding immediate attention. He wore an impeccably tailored suit and carried himself with unmistakable authority. Without hesitation, he strode down the center aisle toward the front of the courtroom. Diana's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus, she whispered. Jamal's eyes widened in recognition and relief. Dad? Marcus Williams didn't acknowledge them yet, his focus entirely on the proceedings before him. He approached the bar that separated the gallery from the court proper. Your Honor, he said, his deep voice carrying easily through the silent room. I need to address this court on a matter of federal importance. Judge Wells frowned. Sir, you are interrupting a judicial proceeding. Please take a seat or leave the courtroom. Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a badge and identification. Marcus Williams, Federal Bureau of Investigation. This court is now witness to a federal civil rights violation, and I am invoking federal jurisdiction in this matter. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Officer Miller's face strained of color as he stared at the badge, then at Jamal, making the connection. That's my son you just assaulted. Officer Miller, Marcus stated, his voice controlled but vibrating with authority. And you've just committed a federal crime in front of dozens of witnesses, including a federal agent. District Attorney Bennett recovered first, striding forward. Your Honor, I move for an immediate dismissal of these proceedings pending review of this unexpected development. Marcus turned to Bennett, his expression cold. Mr. Bennett, I wouldn't be in such a hurry to end these proceedings. You're implicated as well. He reached into his briefcase and produced a stack of documents. I have federal warrants for the arrest of Officer Richard Miller, District Attorney William Bennett, and Judge Harrison Wells on charges of conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, evidence tampering, judicial misconduct, and corruption. The courtroom erupted again. But this time even Judge Wells's gavel couldn't restore order. From various positions around the courtroom, several individuals stood up, revealing themselves as federal agents. Special Agent Terrence Washington approached from the back row, now openly displaying his credentials. The FBI has been monitoring this courthouse as part of an ongoing investigation, Marcus announced. Today's events will be added to an already substantial body of evidence. As federal agents moved to secure the room, Marcus finally turned to his family. The professional demeanor softened as he crossed to Jamal, gently touching his son's injured cheek. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Then he embraced his son, holding him tightly as Jamal's composure finally broke. Diana rushed forward to join them, the family reunited in an island of privacy despite the chaos surrounding them. Judge Wells attempted to assert control one last time. "This court is adjourned pending resolution of these allegations. Everyone clear the courtroom immediately." But as he banged his gavel, a federal agent was already standing beside the bench. "Judge Wells, you'll need to come with us, sir," the agent said firmly. "We have a warrant for your arrest." The revelation of Marcus Williams' true identity transformed the case overnight. The Williams family was escorted to a secure federal building where, in a private conference room, Marcus finally explained the full scope of the situation to his stunned wife and children. "I've been undercover for the past 2 years, Marcus began, his voice heavy with the weight of long-kept secrets. "What started as an investigation into police brutality in neighboring counties led us to discover something much bigger happening right here in our own city." Diana sat rigidly across from her husband, her expressions cycling between relief, anger, and confusion. 2 years of lies, Marcus? 2 years of business trips and missed family dinners? And all this time you were what? Playing spy while your family needed you? Marcus reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I couldn't tell you, Diana. Not even you. The corruption we discovered runs deep, from patrol officers all the way to City Hall. If anyone had suspected I was FBI, not only would the investigation have been compromised, but you and the kids would have been in danger." He turned to Jamal, whose shock was giving way to a complex mix of pride and hurt. "I never imagined they would target you, son. When Agent Washington showed me the emergency messages from your mother, I nearly blew my cover immediately." Marcus spread photographs and documents across the table, revealing the extensive web of corruption they had uncovered. "Officer Miller is just a foot soldier in a much larger operation. For years, the Oak Ridge Westwood Police Department has been systematically targeting black citizens, especially young men, for false arrests. The evidence was damning." Marcus produced charts showing arrest rates by race and neighborhood, with black residents being arrested at 8 times the rate of white residents for identical offenses. "But it goes beyond simple racial profiling," Marcus continued. "There's a financial motive. Every arrest generates revenue through bail, fines, and court fees. And property seizures, that's where the real money is." He showed them documentation of houses, cars, and assets seized from black families under questionable circumstances. Many of these seizures happen in gentrifying areas of Westwood, where developers are buying up properties. When families can't afford legal representation to fight the seizures, they lose everything. Diana's anger began to shift to horror as she grasped the scale of the conspiracy. "Judge Wells?" she asked quietly. Marcus nodded grimly. "A key player. He dismisses legitimate complaints against officers, sets excessive bail amounts specifically for black defendants, and fast-tracks certain cases, like Jamal's, when they serve the larger agenda." "And Bennett?" Jamal asked, still struggling to process everything. "The district attorney personally handles cases that are particularly valuable to the scheme. He doctors evidence, suppresses exculpatory information, and pressures defendants into plea deals even when he knows they're innocent." The most shocking revelation came when Marcus explained the role of Police Chief Parker. "He's been directing the entire operation. Officers are given unofficial quotas for arrests in specific neighborhoods. Those who meet their targets receive bonuses disguised as overtime pay. Those who question the practice find themselves assigned to desk duty or worse. Documents revealed that city officials had been accepting bribes from development companies specifically targeting Westwood properties. Once families are forced out through arrests or financial hardship from legal fees, the developers swoop in, buy the properties at reduced prices, and flip them for massive profits. The officials get kickbacks, the police department gets more funding, and the developers make millions. Marcus had been gathering evidence for years, carefully documenting each connection in the corrupt network. We needed ironclad evidence before moving. These are powerful people with resources and connections. One misstep, and they could have buried everything. Diana finally asked the question that had been haunting her. Why didn't you tell me what you really do? All these years. Marcus's professional facade cracked, revealing the emotional toll of his double life. My handler, Agent Washington, insisted on complete separation between my work and personal life. No exceptions. I wanted to tell you so many times, Diana. But I couldn't risk your safety or compromise the investigation. As Diana processed this new understanding of her husband, Zoe, who had been quietly absorbing everything, spoke up. So Dad's like a superhero with a secret identity? The innocent question broke the tension, bringing a small smile to everyone's faces. Something like that, sweetheart, Marcus replied, grateful for his daughter's simplifying perspective. Special Agent Terrence Washington joined them, providing updates on the rapidly developing situation. We've executed simultaneous arrest warrants across the city. Miller, Wells, Bennett, Chief Parker, and 7 other officers are in custody. We're questioning several city council members and developers as well. Marcus explained that a parallel federal grand jury investigation had been proceeding in secret for months. Prosecutor Sandra Mitchell from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division arrived this morning to take charge of the case. Washington added, "This investigation is about to break nationally. It's potentially one of the largest police corruption cases in decades." As the family absorbed the magnitude of what was happening, news alerts began appearing on their phones. Local stations were breaking the story, though still with limited information. Marcus looked at his family with concern. Now that this is going public, there will be people who want to retaliate. Those we haven't arrested yet, or friends and allies of those in custody. Washington nodded solemnly. That's why we've arranged federal protection for all of you. You'll need to relocate temporarily while we complete the operation and ensure your safety. The reality of their new situation began to sink in. Jamal, who had shown remarkable resilience throughout his ordeal, looked at his father with new eyes, seeing not just a parent he'd known all his life, but a man who had been fighting injustice in ways his family never realized. "You were doing this all along," Jamal said quietly. "While I was growing up complaining about homework and basketball practice, you were actually out there fighting the system." Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "What happened to you should never have happened. But your strength through this, that came from somewhere, Jamal. You get that from your mother, from our community. From knowing what's right even when the world tells you you're wrong." As the family prepared to leave for the safe house, Diana finally took Marcus's hand. The road to rebuilding trust would be long, but in this moment of crisis, they were united in protecting their family. Does the idea of widespread police corruption targeting specific communities seem far-fetched to you, or all too real? Comment number 1 if you believe these systems of injustice exist in America today, or number 2 if you think these problems are exaggerated. Like this video if you're relieved that Jamal finally has his father fighting by his side, and subscribe to see how this family confronts the dangerous forces still threatening them. How far would corrupt officials go to protect their power and money? What would you do if you discovered your spouse had been living a double life, even for noble reasons? The Williams family's ordeal is far from over, so let's continue this incredible story. The safe house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home on the outskirts of the city. surrounded by acres of open land that made surveillance easier for the federal agents assigned to protect the Williams family. Inside, despite the comfortable furnishings and well-stocked kitchen, tension permeated the air. For Jamal, the sudden transition from targeted suspect to protected witness created a psychological whiplash. His world had contracted overnight from basketball courts, school hallways, and neighborhood streets to the confines of a stranger's living room. "How long do we have to stay here?" he asked Agent Lisa Rodriguez, the lead agent on their security detail. "Until we're certain all threats have been neutralized," she replied with professional detachment. "Could be days, could be weeks." Jamal retreated to the bedroom he'd been assigned, bouncing a basketball against the wall in a rhythmic pattern that both soothed and reminded him of everything he was missing. Diana and Marcus circled each other cautiously in the unfamiliar space, their marriage suddenly on uncertain ground after the revelation of Marcus's true career. 15 years, Diana said quietly as they sat at the kitchen table that first night, the children finally asleep. 15 years of marriage, and I never knew who you really were." Marcus winced at her words. "You know who I am, Diana. Being an agent is what I do, not who I am. Everything between us has been real." Diana's laugh held no humor. "Real? You've been lying to me every day since we met. Those consulting jobs that took you away for weeks at a time? Those late-night calls you had to take in private? Was anything you ever told me the truth?" The hurt in her voice cut deeper than anger would have. "I wanted to tell you so many times," Marcus admitted. "When we got married, when Jamal was born, when Zoe came along, there were so many moments when the lies felt impossible to maintain. But my supervisors were clear. Absolute secrecy was non-negotiable. So you chose your job over your family's right to know the truth." It wasn't a question but a judgment that hung heavy between them. Meanwhile, Zoe adapted to their new circumstances with surprising resilience, treating the safe house like an unexpected vacation. She explored every corner, charmed the security agents, and seemed to regard her father's revelation as the most exciting thing that had ever happened in their family. "Did you ever have to shoot anyone, Dad?" she asked over breakfast on their second day. "Zoe," Diana admonished, but Marcus answered honestly. "No, sweetheart. My job was to gather information, not engage in confrontations. The best agents are the ones who never need to draw their weapons." While the Williams family adjusted to their new reality, the city was in turmoil. News of the corruption scandal dominated headlines, with new details emerging hourly as more arrests were made. Marcus monitored developments through secure channels, occasionally conferring with Agent Washington when new information required his input. What the family didn't know was that not everyone implicated in the conspiracy had been captured in the initial sweep. Officer Frank Reynolds, Miller's longtime partner and confidant, had been off duty during the arrests, fishing at a remote lake with no cell service. When he returned to civilization and learned what had happened, he immediately went underground, contacting other officers who remained loyal to the corrupt system. "Miller's been set up," Reynolds told the small group gathered in a hunting cabin outside the city limits. "Some Fed infiltrated the department, and is trying to bring us all down." Reynolds, a stocky 42-year-old with cold eyes and a methodical mind, had been Miller's partner for 8 years. He knew every detail of the conspiracy, and had as much to lose as anyone if the investigation succeeded. "We need to find out who this Fed is and neutralize the threat," he declared. It took less than 2 days for Reynolds to identify Marcus Williams as the undercover agent. A department secretary sympathetic to their cause provided access to personnel files, which revealed the timeline of Marcus's hiring coinciding with the beginning of the federal investigation. "He lives in Westwood," Reynolds told his collaborators. "Has a family, wife, teenage son, young daughter." What Reynolds didn't initially realize was that the Williams family was no longer at their home. But his network of corrupt officers and city employees was extensive. A clerk in the federal courthouse overheard a conversation about witness protection arrangements and passed along a crucial piece of information. The Williams family was being held at a safe house within 50 miles of the city. Reynolds and his team began a systematic search of properties meeting the likely criteria. Meanwhile, at the safe house, tensions reached a breaking point on the fourth night. A secure call from Washington informed Marcus that a leak had been detected. "We have reason to believe information about the protection operation has been compromised," Washington said, his normally calm voice tight with concern. "We're sending reinforcements. But they're at least 90 minutes out." Marcus immediately alerted the security team, who initiated lockdown protocols. "Everyone to the central room," Agent Rodriguez directed, her hand on her holstered weapon. Standard protection formation. As the family huddled in the living room, Marcus checked the security monitors showing the perimeter of the property. Movement in the tree line, he noted, pointing to a shadow that seemed out of place. Multiple figures approaching from the north side. The 4-agent security detail was well trained but outnumbered. "Communications are being jammed," reported Agent Chin, the team's technical specialist. "I can't reach headquarters." Marcus made a rapid decision. They know exactly what they're doing. These aren't amateurs. He turned to Diana. "Remember the go bags I insisted everyone pack? Get them now. We need to be ready to move." Diana hesitated only briefly before springing into action, gathering the emergency supplies Marcus had prepared. For all her anger at his deception, she recognized that his experience might be their only advantage in this moment of crisis. The first shots came as darkness fell completely, taking out the external lights and plunging the property into blackness. "They're trying to blind us," Marcus explained as he moved his family away from windows. Standard tactic. What happened next would redefine the Williams family forever. As Reynolds and his team executed a coordinated attack on the safe house, each family member revealed unexpected depths. Diana, who Marcus had always tried to shield from the dangers of his work, demonstrated remarkable calm under pressure. When one of the attackers broke through a rear window, Diana reacted with swift precision, using self-defense techniques Marcus had never seen her practice. 7 years of Krav Maga classes while you were away on your business trips, she explained after incapacitating the intruder. "I decided if you wouldn't be here to protect us, I'd learn to do it myself." Zoe, despite her youth, maintained complete silence when instructed and followed directions perfectly, even in moments of extreme danger. And Jamal surprised everyone. When Agent Rodriguez was wounded defending the hallway leading to the children's rooms, it was Jamal who pulled her to safety. Applied emergency first aid using techniques learned in a sports medicine class, and then positioned himself as the last line of defense for his sister. "Get back, Zoe," he instructed, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Stay behind me no matter what happens." The family's individual actions coalesced into something Reynolds and his team hadn't anticipated: a unified front of resistance. With the security team coordinating their defense and the Williams family actively participating rather than passively hiding, they managed to hold off the attackers until a helicopter was heard approaching. "Federal reinforcements," Marcus announced, relief evident in his voice. As floodlights from above illuminated the property, most of the attackers scattered into the surrounding woods. But Reynolds, driven by desperation, made one final push toward the house. In the confrontation that followed, it was Marcus who finally subdued him, though not before Reynolds revealed the extent of his hatred. "You betrayed the Brotherhood." Reynolds spat as Marcus secured his restraints. "You chose them over us." Marcus looked at the man with a mixture of pity and disgust. "I chose justice over corruption. I chose what's right over what's easy. That's not betrayal, that's integrity." As federal agents secured the scene and medical personnel attended to the wounded, the Williams family found themselves drawn together, the shared danger having forged a new understanding between them. Diana, watching Marcus efficiently coordinate with the federal team, saw her husband with new eyes, not just as the man who had deceived her, but as someone whose commitment to justice had put him in impossible positions. "You could have died tonight," she said quietly when they finally had a moment alone. "We all could have." Marcus nodded, the reality of that fact written in the lines of exhaustion on his face. "I never wanted this life to touch you or the kids. That's why I kept it separate for so long." Diana took his hand, a gesture of reconciliation if not yet forgiveness. "There is no separate, Marcus. Not in a family. Whatever affects you affects all of us, whether we know about it or not." In the aftermath of the attack, the family was relocated to a military installation with security even Reynolds couldn't penetrate. There, as they processed the trauma of the night, Marcus faced a decision that would define the rest of his career. "The Bureau wants me to withdraw from the case," he told Diana as they watched Jamal and Zoe sleeping in the base infirmary, both exhausted from the ordeal. "They say I'm too personally involved now, that my judgment might be compromised." Diana studied her husband's face, seeing the conflict there. "What do you want to do?" Marcus looked at his children, then back to his wife. "I want to finish what I started. This case, it's bigger than just our city now. What we've uncovered could lead to reforms across the country. But I can't do it if it puts you and the kids at risk again." It was Jamal who made the decision, having awakened during their conversation. "You have to finish it, Dad," he said, his voice still thick with sleep but his eyes clear and determined. "After everything that's happened, you can't walk away now. We'll be okay." Marcus looked at his son with a mixture of pride and concern. "This isn't your burden to carry, Jamal." "Yes, it is," Jamal insisted. "It became my burden the moment Officer Miller put those handcuffs on me. It's all of our burden now." Diana nodded slowly, coming to the same conclusion. "He's right, Marcus. We're in this together now, all the way to the end." The federal courthouse in downtown stood as a monument to justice, its neoclassical columns and broad steps designed to inspire confidence in the legal system. On the morning the trial began, those steps were covered with people, journalists, activists, curious citizens, and supporters of both sides in what the media had dubbed the Oak Ridge Conspiracy case. Security was unprecedented. Federal marshals in tactical gear patrolled the perimeter, checking identification and scanning for weapons. Snipers were visible on nearby rooftops, their presence both reassuring and sobering. The Williams family arrived in an armored SUV with a police escort, emerging into a storm of shouted questions and camera flashes. "Mr. Williams, how does it feel to be the agent who broke this case?" "Jamal, did you know your father was FBI?" "Mrs. Williams, were you aware of your husband's undercover work?" Marcus guided his family through the chaos with a protective arm around Diana and the children. "No comments until after the proceedings," he stated firmly, his expression giving away nothing to the hungry cameras. Inside, the main courtroom had been specially prepared for the high-profile case. Additional security checkpoints had been installed, and the gallery was strictly limited to pre-approved individuals. The defendants, Officer Miller, Judge Wells, D.A. Bennett, Chief Parker, Officer Reynolds, and 7 other officers and officials, sat in a row, each with their own defense attorney. Miller, his confidence shattered by the events of the past weeks, stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Judge Wells, stripped of his judicial authority, seemed diminished in ordinary clothes rather than his customary robes. Federal Judge Elaine Montoya presided, her reputation for fairness and strict adherence to constitutional principles making her the ideal choice for such a sensitive case. "This court is now in session," she announced, her voice clear and authoritative. "The United States versus Richard Miller et al." Department of Justice Prosecutor Sandra Mitchell rose to deliver the opening statement. At 41, Mitchell had built her career prosecuting civil rights violations and police misconduct cases. Her approach was methodical and devastating. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she began. This case represents one of the most egregious abuses of power and betrayals of public trust this country has seen in decades. The evidence will show that the defendants before you today operated not as servants of justice, but as architects of a system designed to target, criminalize, and profit from the city's black citizens. Over the next 3 hours, Mitchell laid out the government's case in precise detail, using charts, videos, and documents to illustrate the scope of the conspiracy. She explained how Marcus Williams had been placed undercover following initial reports of civil rights violations, and how his investigation had gradually uncovered a web of corruption extending far beyond isolated incidents of police misconduct. The evidence will show that this was not about a few bad apples, Mitchell stated. This was a systemic operation with clear financial and racial motivations. When it was the defense's turn, their strategy became immediately clear. Howard Lancaster, the high-powered attorney representing Judge Wells, approached the podium. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the government would have you believe in a vast conspiracy involving dozens of public officials. But what they've actually presented is a collection of unrelated incidents and normal law enforcement activities, stitched together by an agent who went rogue. Lancaster turned to point directly at Marcus. Agent Williams exceeded his authority, manufactured connections where none existed, and ultimately placed his own family in danger through his reckless actions. This case is not about corruption, it's about a federal agent's vendetta against local law enforcement. Marcus remained impassive during this attack, though Diana reached for his hand under the table. Jamal, watching from the gallery, felt a surge of indignation at seeing his father's integrity questioned. The trial proceeded with witness after witness, each testimony building the government's case. Marcus was the lead witness, spending 4 grueling days on the stand detailing his 2 years of undercover work. He presented audio recordings, financial records, and surveillance footage that painted a damning picture of systematic civil rights violations. Officer Miller specifically instructed junior officers to increase arrest rates in predominantly black neighborhoods, Marcus testified, presenting a recorded conversation as evidence. The exact quote was, "I don't care what you have to do, find something to charge them with. We need to hit our numbers this month." The defense attorneys subjected Marcus to intense cross-examination, attempting to portray him as overzealous and biased. "Isn't it true that your judgment became compromised when your son was arrested?" Lancaster demanded. "Didn't you accelerate the investigation and make arrests prematurely because of your personal involvement?" Marcus's response was measured. "When my son was wrongfully arrested, I immediately recused myself from that specific aspect of the case. All actions taken regarding Jamal's situation were directed by Special Agent Washington to ensure objectivity." Diana's testimony provided a powerful human dimension to the case. She described the impact of Jamal's false arrest on their family, her voice steady but emotional as she recounted the fear and helplessness she had experienced. "My son, an honor student with no record, was suddenly treated like a criminal. The system that was supposed to protect him became the threat." Jamal's testimony came on the 10th day of the trial. Now 17. He carried himself with remarkable poise as he described his arrest, detention, and the courtroom assault. His account of Officer Miller planting evidence, and later striking him in court left many jurors visibly disturbed. During cross-examination, defense attorneys attempted to portray Jamal as anti-police and suggest he had behaved suspiciously during his encounter with Miller. "Isn't it true that you questioned Officer Miller's authority during your interaction?" Miller's attorney asked. "No, sir," Jamal replied calmly. "I respectfully asked why I was being detained, which is my constitutional right." The courtroom dynamics shifted dramatically when several officers from the department stepped forward to testify against their colleagues. Officer Sarah Jenkins, a 5-year veteran, described how she had been instructed to focus her patrols exclusively in black neighborhoods. "We were told to meet quotas for arrests and citations," she testified. Those who didn't meet their numbers were assigned to undesirable shifts or passed over for promotion. The most surprising testimony came from residents of both Oak Ridge and Westwood. Mrs. Eleanor Chambers, whose testimony at Jamal's hearing had been so pivotal, once again proved a compelling witness. "I've lived in Oak Ridge for 47 years, she stated firmly. "What I've observed in recent years is a deliberate targeting of young black men who are simply walking through our neighborhood. It's shameful, and it's not what our community should stand for." As the trial progressed, national attention intensified. News outlets ran special reports on similar patterns in other cities, raising questions about systemic issues in policing across the country. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered daily, their signs demanding justice for Jamal and end corrupt policing. Mitchell's closing argument was powerful in its simplicity. "The evidence before you shows beyond any reasonable doubt that these defendants conspired to violate the civil rights of citizens based on their race, to pervert the course of justice for financial gain, and to maintain a system that treated some Americans as less deserving of constitutional protections than others. This isn't just a case about corrupt individuals. It's about whether we as a society will tolerate two systems of justice, one for those with power and privilege, and another for everyone else." The defense made their final appeals to the jury, arguing that the prosecution had built their case on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of a biased federal agent. Lancaster pleaded with the jury to consider that what the government portrayed as conspiracy might simply be the normal functioning of an overburdened criminal justice system. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned to the packed courtroom. The forewoman, a retired school teacher, stood to deliver the verdict. "In the case of the United States versus Richard Miller et al., on the count of conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, we find the defendants guilty." She continued through the list of charges: evidence tampering, judicial misconduct, corruption, assault, with "guilty" following each one. Miller slumped in his seat. Judge Wells remained rigidly upright, but the color drained from his face. As the Williams family sat absorbing the verdicts, Jamal felt no triumph or vindication, only a somber recognition that while justice had been served in this case, the larger issues remained. Outside the courthouse, as reporters clamored for statements, Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "This case was never just about what happened to you, Jamal. It was about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else's son or daughter." Jamal nodded, understanding for the first time the true weight of his father's work. 1 year after the verdicts that shook the city's power structure to its foundation, the Williams family gathered in their living room to watch a special news report. "Today marks the passage of the Civil Rights Enforcement and Police Accountability Act," the anchor announced. "Inspired in part by the landmark Oak Ridge conspiracy case. This federal legislation creates new oversight mechanisms for law enforcement agencies nationwide." Jamal, now 18 and preparing to leave for college, felt a complex mixture of emotions watching the report. The past year had transformed not just his family but the entire community. Judge Harrison Wells was serving a 20-year sentence for his role in the conspiracy. Richard Miller received 15 years for civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and assault. District Attorney Bennett, Police Chief Parker, and the other convicted officials received sentences ranging from 8 to 18 years. The ripple effects extended far beyond those directly involved. Marcus had been offered and accepted a promotion to lead the FBI's new Civil Rights Enforcement Division, a position created specifically to address systemic abuses like those uncovered in the Oak Ridge case. "It means more time in Washington," he had explained to the family when considering the offer. "But it's a chance to implement real change on a national level." Diana had discovered her own calling in the aftermath of the trial. Using her experience as an educator and the painful knowledge gained through Jamal's ordeal, she established the Williams Justice Initiative, an advocacy organization for victims of police misconduct that specialized in supporting families navigating the legal system. "When Jamal was arrested, I felt completely lost. Diana explained in her first public speech launching the organization. No parent should face that system alone. The organization quickly gained national recognition, with Diana testifying before congressional committees and consulting on police reform initiatives across the country. For Jamal, the path forward had crystallized during the trial. Watching the legal proceedings, both the corruption of Judge Wells and the principled professionalism of Judge Montoya had inspired him to pursue law as a career. His personal statement for college applications, describing how his experience had shaped his understanding of justice, had earned him a full scholarship to a prestigious university. "I want to be part of fixing the system from within," he told his parents. "Dad changes things through investigation, Mom through advocacy, and I'll do it through the law itself." Even 12-year-old Zoe had found her voice, becoming an unexpected youth activist. When her middle school held a career day, she had confidently told her classmates, "My dad catches corrupt police, my mom helps their victims, my brother's going to change the laws, and I'm going to be president to make sure none of this is necessary anymore." The Westwood neighborhood had seen positive changes as well, with the corrupt officials removed and development schemes exposed. The community had organized to protect longtime residents from displacement. Property values increased based on genuine neighborhood improvements rather than artificial manipulation. And a community land trust was established to preserve affordable housing. One of the most significant changes came in policing. The department, now under new leadership, implemented a community policing initiative with Jamal serving on the Youth Advisory Board. Officers were required to live in the neighborhoods they patrolled, receive implicit bias training, and operate with body cameras that couldn't be manipulated or disabled. Marcus had been called to testify before Congress multiple times, explaining how the corruption in one city revealed vulnerabilities in the system nationwide. "What we discovered wasn't unique to our community," he testified. "Similar patterns exist across the country, and without structural reforms, they will continue." Perhaps most surprising was the friendship that developed between Mrs. Eleanor Chambers and Jamal. The elderly white woman who had stood up for truth in the courtroom became a regular visitor to the Williams home, often bringing her famous lemon pound cake and stories about the neighborhood's history. "Young man," she told Jamal one afternoon as they sat on the porch, "I've lived long enough to see this country change in ways I never thought possible. What happened to you was terrible. But what you and your family did with that injustice, that's how real change happens." The evidence gathered during the investigation led to the review of hundreds of previous cases handled by the corrupt officials. To date, 37 wrongfully convicted individuals had been exonerated and released, with more cases under review. Financial restitution was being provided to those whose property had been unjustly seized. On the anniversary of the courtroom incident that had exposed the conspiracy, the community held a celebration in the park adjoining Westwood and Oak Ridge. What had once been an invisible boundary between neighborhoods became a symbol of unity, with residents from both areas coming together to commemorate the changes of the past year. Jamal stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse crowd. "1 year ago, I was arrested for walking through a neighborhood where some thought I didn't belong. Today, we're all standing together in a space that belongs to all of us." He glanced at his family in the front row, his father, whose secret work had ultimately created the possibility for justice, his mother, whose fierce advocacy had turned personal pain into community healing, and his sister, whose unbounded confidence in a better future inspired everyone around her. What happened to me could have ended as just another statistic, another young black man swallowed by an unjust system. Instead, it became the catalyst for transformation, not just for my family or this community, but potentially for our entire country. As Jamal concluded his speech to enthusiastic applause, he caught sight of a group of younger kids watching him with admiration. After the ceremony, they approached him hesitantly. "Is it true you stood up to a corrupt cop and now you're going to be a lawyer?" one boy asked, his eyes wide. Jamal knelt to meet the child at eye level. What's true is that when something wrong happens, you have the power to speak up. Justice isn't automatic, it takes all of us working together to make it real. The boy nodded solemnly, absorbing this lesson. As the Williams family walked home together, Marcus put his arm around his son's shoulders. You know, when I first went undercover, I thought I was fighting to expose corrupt individuals. What I've learned from you, from this whole experience, is that true justice isn't just about removing bad actors, it's about transforming systems and communities. Jamal looked at his father. The man whose dual identity had once seemed like betrayal but now represented commitment to a cause greater than himself. We're just getting started, aren't we? Marcus smiled. Yes, son. We're just getting started. What would you do if you witnessed injustice in your community? Would you have the courage to stand up like Jamal and his family did? Comment below with your thoughts on this powerful story. If you believe in the importance of fighting for justice and holding corrupt officials accountable, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shine a light on important social issues. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that one person's courage can truly change a system. Thank you for joining me for this journey through the Williams family's extraordinary fight for justice. Remember, transformation begins with truth, continues with courage, and is sustained by community. The story of the Williams family teaches us that justice isn't something that simply exists, it must be fought for, sometimes at great personal cost. When systems become corrupted, it takes extraordinary courage from ordinary people to restore balance. Jamal's experience shows how racial bias can destroy innocent lives, while Marcus demonstrates that working within the system can create meaningful change. Diana reminds us that advocacy transforms personal pain into community healing. Perhaps most powerfully, this story illustrates that true justice requires both individual action and collective responsibility. The elderly Mrs. Chambers proves that standing for truth transcends racial divides and generational gaps. Even young Zoe teaches us that hope for a better future gives purpose to present struggles. Ultimately, the Williams family's journey reveals that transformation begins with truth-telling, continues through persistent action, and succeeds when communities unite against injustice. Their story isn't just about exposing corruption, it's about rebuilding systems that protect all citizens equally, regardless of race or background. The most profound lesson is that justice delayed need not be justice denied if we have the courage to demand accountability. What would you do if you witnessed racial injustice happening right in front of you? Would you have the courage to speak up like Mrs. Chambers? Or the determination to fight the system like the Williams family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you or made you think differently about our justice system, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of courage and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration to stand up against racism and corruption in their own community. Thank you for joining me on this journey through an extraordinary story of justice, family, and the power of speaking truth to power. Remember, change begins with you, one brave action at a time.